right. Well, thank you for this opportunity. I thought before I dive in to talk a bit about my experience, I talk a bit about myself first and just a little bit about my background here. And so just so you guys are aware, I was originally born in South Korea in the 70s. It's a picture of me when I was a little baby, my mom holding me when I was there. And then as a toddler, I moved to the US when I was about 4 years old as an immigrant. And I grew up in the Chicagoland area, and like most kids in that era, I was a big sports fan, big Chicago Bears fan. So that I know for those of you who are from New England, we happened to beat the Patriots that year in the '86 Bears a long time ago. But I did grow up watching and loving Michael Jordan. And Frank Thomas there is my favorite baseball player. But I just as a kid growing up in Chicago, just a typical sports fan, just doing your typical things in that area. But in the 90s is when I went to school, and this is where I started to get interested in technology. And I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, studied computer science there. And at that time in the mid to late 90s, there was a guy by the name of Mark Andreessen who was a grad student there and started basically developed this new concept at the time called a web browser. And he didn't like the university just kind of keeping the intellectual capital for himself. And he actually moved out to Silicon Valley and started a company called Mosaic. And that's what really started and kicked off a lot of what we call the dot-com evolution in the late 90s to early 2000s. And a lot of my classmates at the time at the University of Illinois, went on to do a lot of big things in Silicon Valley. So some of them were founders of YouTube, started PayPal, Yelp, etc. And so I think one of the biggest things that I learned during my time at the university was that there was a shift in technology and how technology is really advancing and how you can really be disruptive in the way that we do things today. And so on the left there, I spent a lot of time in the Granger lab over there, and then on the right, there's one of the things you may or may not know is that there's these things called supercomputers around the globe. And one of them is hosted at the University of Illinois called Blue Waters, and they're being used today for a lot of COVID-19 models. And so when they try to do those calculations of figuring out, just what the rate of infection and controls and those sorts of things, when you hear about that in the newspapers or on TVs, a lot of these supercomputers are helping to do a lot of that. And as Rebecca had mentioned, about 16 years ago, we married Rebecca, my lovely wife, and we have two children, Anna and Julia. They're 11 and 13. This is a trip of us when we went to Europe a few years back. The one on the left is in Paris, and the one on the right, we did the Sound of Music tour when we went to Austria there. And it was just a really fun time. And then the picture I don't have is our newest addition, Bailey, who's a 8-month-old Maltipoo, and he's roaming around somewhere in the house right now, probably wondering what we're doing because we're all probably locked up watching, doing this video at the moment. But just a little about my professional background, just so you guys understand where I'm coming from. I have about 20 plus years of IT experience. I've worked in a lot of different types of organizations. Earlier in my career, when I was doing more consulting, I worked for several large corporations like Best Buy, AT&T, McDonald's Corporation based in Chicago. I worked for several government agencies like the Chicago Housing Authority, Chicago Transit Authority, and even here in Massachusetts, like the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and also some technology shops. I worked at a startup called Yilco Technologies that we started a website called Rent Sentinel that was in the multifamily space. And if you're looking for an apartment back in the day, you might have used our site or seen an ad from that tool. And like any good startup, you get bigger, get bought. I was employee number 5, and we grew to 50 within a couple of years. But then a much bigger competitor called RealPage, they're a publicly traded company with about a $2 billion valuation, bought us out. And so because I didn't want to move out to Silicon Valley at the time, and was looking for an opportunity to work with real humans as opposed to being virtual all the time, I found an opportunity at BCG about 6.5 years ago, where I'm currently the global IT director, managing a lot of their marketing systems and platforms and such. And so for those of you who don't know anything about BCG, we're a 57-year-old company. We have about 21,000 employees around the world. We're traditionally known to do strategy consulting, although we've expanded our offerings quite a bit since then. We have about 90 offices in about 50 countries worldwide. And so as I was thinking about, this talk and how to frame it, the way that I wanted to think through just this talk was things that I wish someone would have told me when I started my IT career. Because I know a lot of you guys are going through the training right now, and you guys are probably on the front end of what an IT career might look like. And so the way I was thinking about it is, okay, what would I, not knowing what I know now, what would I have told my 20-year-old self, about IT that I wish someone would have told me back then? And so that's sort of the model that I wanted to think about this talk. And so I'll just have a couple of tidbits, and then afterwards, certainly open to question and answers. But I thought I'd just share a couple of insights first. And so the first thing that came to mind about IT is that whatever you're learning right now in any one of your classes, it's going to be old in 5 years. you know, and what do I mean by that? Simply the evolution of technology is continually expanding. It's ever changing, and even think about the things that we're familiar with. Like on the top there, we think of communication devices, right? We started off with home phones in our houses, where it was like literally tagged or tied to a wall, or maybe something near your couch, right? And then you move on to the various generations of mobile technology, from the 1G to the 2G, with 3G, with the iPhone, it came out that we have these things called smartphones. And with 4G, we're advancing eventually to 5G technologies. We're going to have even increasingly a faster speed of communication and data. And you think of even the evolution of computing. 50 years ago, the first idea of a computer was really just a calculator, right? And then you have like these old school machines that have advanced over time to the point where we have laptops, and where you start to see this convergence happening of with 5G technology and the advancements of computing, following this thing called Moore's Law, where computing's doubling every couple of years, is that we're going to start to see this culmination of various devices and data that's being replicated. And so you might even see it's not far-fetched to have like wearable devices that truly can process something as robust as what your laptop can do today, just in a few more years. And as you start to even think through like application stacks and how architecture has evolved in technology, even 15 years ago, here on the left, you'll see that when you think through when I first started in a lot of the internet applications that I've developed, it was a very monolithic, pretty simple architecture. You maybe had 3 or 4 layers to it. But in the last 15 years, we're starting to see that these technology stacks, because of the evolution of the various communication devices and computing power that we've advanced to, it's actually a lot more complicated. It has a lot more different pieces to it, whether it's a mobile app or a tablet or a website, right? And as you go down the layers in terms of the data that's where we're trying to process and consume, there's this huge consolidation and culmination of all this data that's being kind of funneled around from system to system, that there isn't actually oftentimes one piece of technology is doing everything, but it's all these interconnecting parts, and all the way to the point where we're doing more analytics and being able to report on these sort of things, and these things called data lakes. And as we think through now, as we get into the new millennium, moving into a lot more complicated architectures, or why do we even need servers anymore? We're doing these things called serverless compute. We're increasing AI technology, that things that we thought about were just science fiction 20 years ago is actually becoming reality today. We're starting to orchestrate all of these different pieces across these different platforms in a very aggregated and systematized way that was never been thought of. And as I mentioned earlier, with the 5G technology, the ability to actually download data in a way that's consumable, where you don't necessarily have this lag time, is actually becoming more and more real. And with all of that, the hackers and the people that are trying to get the bad actors, so to speak, are becoming more sophisticated. And so cybersecurity is becoming ever more prevalent and important, because these different surface areas are beginning to emerge that didn't exist again even 20 years ago. And so maybe another way to look at this is like, for those of you who use Amazon to order things, right? One of the things that underpowers the technology that Amazon does is something called their Amazon Web Services, the infrastructure that allows them to do this. And if you look at even 10 years ago, when they first started their cloud platform, you'll notice here in 2009, they just had maybe a release a week, And as you expand year after year, you're seeing a 50% change of increase every single year, to the point now where it's no longer a week before every new change or new feature, but it's literally seconds. Every 2 to 3 seconds, Amazon is deploying something that's brand new, that's never been seen. And it's not just Amazon, but Microsoft's doing the same thing, Google's doing the same thing, and all these other vendors that we work with on a very everyday basis are implementing and deploying things at a massive scale. It just simply isn't sustainable. Like, there's no way they could keep up with it. And that's one of the things that Andy Jassy, who's the CEO of Amazon Web Services, said, is that the pace of innovation is not slowing up. It's actually getting faster and faster and faster. And just to give, like, to close on this particular segment here, this is just our roadmap here at BCG. So this is our IT department, and these are the things that we're trying to do just in 2020 alone. And I'm not even going to spend that time to try to drain through this deck, because there's so many things that we're doing as an organization just to, in a sense, keep up with what we're trying to do. These are just our change initiatives. This doesn't even include what we already have in the pipeline. And every major large organization around the globe has something like this. They have these things called roadmaps, where we start to leverage out and think through, what are we going to do in order to change technology. And so, getting back to that point that I just made, and I know it's a bit dizzying and it's probably pretty quick, that I wasn't able to dig deep into it, but the reality is, whatever you're learning now, right now, it's not going to be there probably 5 years from now. And so, what does that mean for each and every one of us? Simply means that if you're in the IT profession, it just means that you have to continually learn. You have to continually learn to adapt. Like, you can't think as if I'm going to make it in IT and think as if things aren't going to change. Because the reality is that things have to change. And this mindset of continual learning just has to be part of who you are, or you're just not going to sustain it or make it too long here in the IT profession. Okay. So that's point number one. Point number two, especially early on in your career, you just have to get stuff done in a timely fashion. If I want to give advice to myself, is learn to get stuff done. And I love this quote by Walt Disney. He says that the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. And for those of you who have worked at some level or another, you might have seen some of this, where there's a lot of people that love to talk about shop and love to talk about all these ideas. But at the end of the day, the ones that tend to make it more than the ones who have not are the ones that learn how to get stuff done, right? Learn how to solve problems, learn how to tackle complexity, learn how to just dig in there and get it done no matter what. Now, it doesn't mean you have to do it alone, right? Even for my particular role, I don't know everything about what's happening in the technology stack. So I bring my friends together or colleagues together to solve some of these complex problems. Like, in fact, just right before I joined this call, I brought in some of my colleagues from security and architecture to talk about how to tackle this really complex and tricky security issue that we're trying to do. I'm not a security expert, but I had to bring those people in so we were able to help each other resolve this issue. But that said, though, I think here's the thing to keep in mind is that, as you start collaborating and building these relationships, the thing to think about is, are you more of a taker or are you more of a giver? In these sort of these relationships, are you the one that's constantly asking for help, or are the ones that are actually delivering and offering help? And trust me, people notice. If you're the type of person that's just asking for help all the time but isn't reciprocating, people notice, and by and large, your coworkers and your boss are going to take note of that. And at a minimum, if you have this mentality that I want to give and be able to collaborate, but also be the one that's also contributing and helping, that is going to help you go a long way. But it goes into that attitude of, hey, I need to help people, but I also are going to need their help at the same time. And it's just this ability to saying, hey, look, let's just get stuff done, realizing I don't have all the answers, but no matter what it takes and who I need to bring it in, just having that go-getter mentality is so important. And here, the quote on the bottom here is something that I think kind of hits this point home, is that here's a hiring manager at Google. I just plop this quote out. One of the things she said is that when she hires candidates, the ones that I seem to be most naturally successful are the ones that are just curious, right? They're important. It's important for them to not only be curious, but to pick things up and then have this can-do attitude. And I love that quote, because it's in so many ways, as I mentioned, things are always changing, that oftentimes this notion of having this expert is becoming less and less common, because we don't have experts in a lot of these technology stacks. What we need, though, are people that are curious, that can continually learn and really work and collaborate with one another in order to get the job done. there's that old expression that says, curiosity killed the cat. Well, in IT, it's not really the case, because curiosity is such a component, such a key component. But really, what's going to kill your career is complacency. And so if you want to continue and grow in your IT career, remain curious, and simply just don't get complacent. Okay, so number two, go get stuff done. And number three, third point I want to just bring up is that if you want to move up in your career, you still will need to learn how to communicate effectively, right? I just mentioned that doing is much more important than talking. However, I will say that communicating is still very, very important, especially if you want to advance in your career, to get ahead. In fact, there was a recent survey that was done last year where they surveyed a bunch of IT professionals, and almost half of them, 46%, said that the number one skill that they needed in order to move up in their career growth wasn't to be a technology expert. It wasn't learning this technology stack, or learning how to be a security champion or anything along those lines. For IT professionals, they're saying interpersonal communication was the number one success factor. And so you could sort of look at it this way. The way I sort of look at it is, early in your career, if you want to keep your job, you certainly need to do your job, right, and be able to get stuff done. However, if you want to move up in your career, and to sort of have more influence and have the ability to lead and to do transformational change, that ability to communicate effectively is going to be probably the biggest differentiator between those who are stuck doing core staff kind of implementation roles versus those who are leading and driving a lot of these changes. And then, to be honest, I think within just my IT colleagues, like I said, I've been doing this for over 20 years. One of the common criticisms that I hear all the time, or the common phrase I hear in every single one of the organizations I worked in, is, I have no idea what the IT person just said to me. And you might have all been there at some phrase or another, especially when they're talking to someone who's not in a technical role, or who doesn't have a technical background at all. And however, one of the things that I've heard just from my background and my experience working is, thank you for explaining that to me, because I actually don't feel dumb and actually understand what you were talking about. Which, again, I don't know if it's a combination of me being able to articulate, or simply just the bar is so low that just being able to just communicate in an effective way makes a world of difference. And honestly, I think that's been one of the biggest things that, if I were to say what's kind of helped propel my career, is not so much that I was the best coder out there, or I understood architecture the best, but it was this ability to communicate with one another that might have differentiated me from a lot of my colleagues, especially in the technical realm there. And so, as you think about not only building your technical skills, the thing to think about is, how are you learning and growing in the way that you communicate with one another. And so, one of the things that I do, if I were to narrow down just things that I look for when I'm hiring. So imagine if you sent me a resume and I wanted to figure out whether or not your communication skills sort of meet the bar of what I look for. I look for these kind of three basic things here. The first thing is precise writing. As I read your resume, is it written with good grammar? Is it clear? Is it concise? Do you get to the point? Can you write in a way that's effective given the audience you're trying to communicate to? The second thing is just, effective oral communication. I'm going to ask you questions that are just about a lot of different technical concepts, and I've not only for my teams, but I've been part of interviewing teams where I've been part of all parts of the IT organization, and so I've interviewed for a lot of different roles that aren't even necessarily my strong suit, but I might ask them a question that I might not know super well, but just ask that person to simply explain it to me, and can they explain those concepts in a clear, concise manner? And if not, I mean, that to me, that's a red flag, because it shows me that maybe they themselves will struggle when they communicate, or maybe they don't really know it as well as they think they do. And third, I think the biggest thing is this idea of listening, right? Communication is a two-way street. It's not just you being able to speak, but do you actually listen? And that's actually one of my personal pet peeves, is when I ask questions to potential candidates, do they actually listen to my question and answer them? right? Do I get a sense that they're grasping what I'm trying to get them to understand? And again, if they're not really listening or really absorbing what I'm trying to say, that again is a huge red flag to me as to maybe not this person might not be right for our particular team. There's this, there's this quote by Ernest Hemingway. When people talk, listen completely, because most people never listen. I think that's one of the missing gaps we often see, probably in our society at large, but certainly within the workplace. I've seen that is that people love to just be able to speak and speak their minds. But one of the most effective things that you can do when you're in a meeting or when you're interacting with someone is, are you truly listening to what they're trying to say and allowing them to feel heard? And so as you think through your communication vehicles, it's not just what the words you come out of your mouth, but also it's the things that come in through your ears as well. Okay. So number 3, learn to communicate effectively if you want to get promoted. The next point I wanted to talk about is you just need to develop great customer service skills. Develop great customer service skills. So what do I mean by that? Um, Here's a quote that I got from a support manager at a large technology company called Atlassian. We use a lot of their tools, like called Confluence and Jira. And so if you're in the technology world, you might have heard of those tools as well. But as in an article, they asked the support manager, what are the best attributes that their help desk employees have? And this is an interesting quote, because I feel like it's so true, is that our best help desk employees do a great job because they truly want to help others, right? Not because it's simply their job. Right? It's this notion of just having this customer service mentality. And even though this quote is specifically about help desk people, where in a sense it is their job, what I found is that in all parts of IT, even in what I do, it very much is a service oriented profession. And whether you're a cloud engineer or whether you're a data scientist or even an ethical hacker, the things that I found is my best coworkers, the best employees within our organization, are the ones that are truly looking out for their customers and always looking out for their coworkers and figuring out ways that they can help, right? Not because I'm just doing my job, so to speak, but it's because they genuinely want to help other people. And so here's the reality that unless you're going to be the founder, like a Steve Jobs, of this cutting edge new technology at the time, right? Most of us are going to be working for someone at some point. We're really going to be in the service of others, right? And so even as we continue to build and maintain and deploy these different platforms and technologies, we're going to learn, or we're going to need to learn to serve our customers and our people better. Because if you don't, the fact of the matter is, like, why are you in this business? Because ultimately technology is there to enable and to help other people get their jobs done better. Oftentimes you're not going to find jobs that are just there technology sort of in it by themselves, right? You're trying to solve problems and make people's lives better. And so one of the best ways to do that is just have this customer service mentality, right? And start to think through, like, what is their customer journey or their user journey as they offer this service. So whether it's like a help desk person, imagine if you were in their shoes, what would it be like for them to ask this question or get this service done? And I found that, especially in our organization, we've been trying to do this more and more, that it's actually led to better results and sort of this better set of metrics in terms of how satisfied are you with the service we just provided. Those tend to go up is when you actually start to put yourselves in those shoes, right? And so the more you're able to do that and really think in that way, I do think it's not only going to help you within your own organization, but it'll help you just as a career person that within IT. That these are some of the little intangibles that seem to work out pretty well. Okay, so besides developing great customer service skills, here's the other thing I just want to think about and want you to consider, is that in any organization, like I said, unless you're the founder, you got to remember who your biggest customer is, and more often than not, it's going to be your boss. And for many of us, it might think it's a bit of a weird or strange concept, but let me just kind of explain to you, especially if this is something you've never really thought about before. But this is just practical reality, right? I just wanted to share some of these insights with you as to how I think about these things. Is that why having your boss or thinking of your boss as your biggest customer can actually work, and why I think it makes sense is when you think about, number one, when you're in a job and you figure out who's going to write your reviews or promote you, it's your boss that does that. They're the ones that approve your salary. They're the ones that approve your ratings and your reviews. And especially early on in your career, the last thing you want to do is typically tick off your boss. Now that doesn't mean, for instance, if you have a boss that's unethical or doing things that are inappropriate or illegal, that you should stay with them. But certainly if you have a good boss, the last thing you want to do is you want to let them down and just sort of drop the ball, right? So just think about that, is that when you think through your boss as your biggest customer, that's just one of the mindsets that you should have. The other thing too is when you think about your boss, your biggest customer, as they grow, right, you could also grow with them as you climb through that corporate ladder. Oftentimes what I found is that as my bosses have moved up, sort of up the chain a bit, oftentimes they need to backfill their own roles. And if you're that guy or that gal that's sort of meeting those needs, oftentimes you can be that one to backfill them. And so as they grow, right, there's that sense of, it's that sort of that vicious cycle of, now I get to grow along with that person as well, right? And so it's sort of like rising tides all float boats. It's that ability to be able to grow together will also help. And the third point too, of why this helps, is that when you are actually working with your boss and helping them become, um, kind of like thinking of them more as your customer, more so than having them do stuff for you, is that then you're able to start to tackle and solve bigger problems. It goes back to that old saying I said earlier, like, are you more of a giver or a taker? I think the lens that I often look at it is, are you solving more problems for your boss, or are you creating new ones? Right. And that's a good lens. It's a simple lens. Is if you're at a boss to look at you and say, hey, are you a problem creator or a problem solver? More often than not, if you're not the one that's solving the problems, there's a pretty good chance that you're probably not going to rise and advance much in your career. What you want to do is be that person that's solving these problems for your boss and tackling these things. And that's one of the things I do even with my boss today, is I work with her. I ask, like, hey, what are things I could take off your plate to make your life easier? And the thing you got to remember is, your boss is a human too. He or she would rather have someone to help solve their problems and create new ones. And so the more you can take off their plate, it's just human nature. They're going to have a better positive impression of you, and they're going to try to make your life and your career much better. Okay. So, number 5, remember your boss is your biggest customer. Number 6, as you think through early in your career, how, if you want to think through, like, how do you want to pivot or market yourself, or how should you, think through the things you should learn? I think tactically speaking, earlier in your career, I do think in this day and age, you should try to become an expert in something marketable, instead of like a generalist, sort of a jack of all trades. Right. And the key here is to be an expert in something marketable, something that will set you up for more opportunities. And why do I say that? Because I think when you think through sort of the landscape now of all the different opportunities here in the new digital world, the reality is that there's so many new skills that are there, right? As I mentioned, if you remember those charts from before, there were so many different pit parts to sort of this digital and technology landscape that's changing, that there simply aren't enough people to fill those roles. There's huge gaps, in all these different sectors of technology. Whether it's like a digital transformation manager, right? There's like social media managers and people that are familiar with that. There's UX designers, product managers within the analytics space. That we need more data scientists and business intelligence specialists. We need more engineers and robotics help. And even with these new ways of working with things like agile, we need people like that can run these meetings called scrum meetings and be able to kind of manage the new ways and new styles that we operate today. And so as you think about that, um, what you want to do is figure out what, go to where there's opportunities ahead, as opposed to going to where things are, where things are today. And there's this old expression, I think it was Wayne Gretzky that said this. He was a famous hockey player that was one of the greatest of all time. It's like, hey, they asked him a question like, how do you become so good at what you do? And I think one of the things he said is, well, I never go where the puck is, I go to where the puck is going, right? That he's always thinking ahead. And it's the same way as you think through your career and the areas that you want to invest in. For instance, I wouldn't recommend being an expert in something that's sort of legacy or very popular today. But if I were in your shoes, what I would do is figure out where are things heading tomorrow and become an expert in those areas right now, because there simply is a gap and there simply is a need. If you want to learn a little bit of inside baseball, why that's helpful or important is if you were to say, what's the number one thing that organizations are looking for to make them grow, or what's the number one success factor? Time and time again, this is not the only survey. People have said this over and over again. It's talent. There's simply a lack of talent in key roles, especially in technology, that we just can't fill. There just aren't enough people to do it. And so what you want to be is actually in that what they consider the talent gap, because there's this concept of a talent gap that exists. And so if you can make yourself marketable in these areas, this is what organizations are thinking about, is that having and securing this talent is what's going to enable them to really grow as an organization. Okay. So yeah, so just early in your career, my recommendation is to be an expert and not a generalist. But I'll end with this though, is that later on in your career to start to grow, you got to learn to put it all together, and 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 as you continue to grow and mature in your growth, you just start to move up sort of that corporate ladder. That ability to putting it all together and being more of that generalist actually can be helpful, because one of the things that what's going on in technology, that there's so many things that are out there. There's information that's, it's too much of an information overload. But what people are yearning for, what they really want, are insights. People that can put it all together, that actually makes it actionable and helpful in a consolidated way. Here's a quote from David Epstein, who's an author. And I love this quote because basically, as you think through like people that have been successful in leadership, what they say is the more varied your training is, the better you're able to apply your skills flexibly in situations you haven't seen. And so as you think through like becoming an expert in one particular technology roadmap, or technology field, just remember to also keep your head up, so to speak, and just remember to look at the big picture and just don't stay microcosm into that world. And um and just, and just to think through just what this means, even for me personally. Here's a reference architecture, just one of my projects that I'm part of, called Lead to Cash internally. As you can see, this is our architecture for the program we're trying to do, and each box in essence represents a different type of technology, and there's probably about 50 or 60 different boxes here. you know Now, I'm not an expert in most of these by any shape or by any means whatsoever. But that said, though, I think one of the things where in a leadership role that I'm trying to do is to put all of these things together in some sort of consolidated, unified way, so that from our end user perspective, that they don't know what's actually under the hood. To them, it just feels like it's a unified, seamless experience. And you can imagine, with all the complexity that's underneath, to be able to do that is a very challenging and difficult thing to do. But as you move up in the organization, as you move away from sort of an expert into more of a generalist leader, these are the type of things and these are the type of skills that'll allow you and give you the opportunities to grow. And so as I close, I love to just kind of end with a quote from Satya Nadella. For those of you who don't know who Satya Nadella is, he's the current CEO of Microsoft for the last 5 years or so. What he did is he started off 20 some odd years ago as just a simple engineer at Microsoft, and he just sort of rose through the ranks all the way through for the last few decades, and he finally became CEO like 5 years ago. And he was sort of put on all these various different projects, from like Windows servers to Azure computing to like to some of these Xbox and things of that nature. All these kind of very type of experiences, and so the day he became CEO, I just thought this is fascinating because I feel like he puts a lot of these things together. Is that he sent out an email to his entire Microsoft staff, and here's a little snippet that I thought just kind of brings it all together. Is that what he wrote? It's like, for many of you who know me, you say that I am defined by my curiosity and this thirst for learning. Right? I buy more books than I can finish. I sign up for more online courses than I can complete, and I fundamentally believe that if you are not learning new things, you stop doing great and useful things. And here's like sort of the use case of somebody that started off as just a pure technical, core contributor, and literally in the last couple of decades, because of his curiosity and because of his desire to learn, because of his ability to grow and not stay stagnant, rose through the ranks of Microsoft. And if you guys know anything about the Microsoft history, if you guys remember, during the Steve Ballmer years, they were sort of dead on water. They were not considered an innovative company. But in the last 5 years, their valuation and their place in the marketplace has tremendously been transformed, and they're actually looked at as one of the big turnaround stories in the technology world today. And so as we close, um, I just want to say that, hey, this is like a great time to be living, especially if you're in the technology field. It's a time in human history where technological innovation is really starting to grow at a tremendously rapid pace. And there's plenty of opportunity for each and one of us, every one of us, who want to take it, right? It is for those of us who don't want to settle, who want to continue to grow, continue to push, and those who remain serious, curious. And so with that, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to share a few things that I've learned and I wished someone would have told me as I started my IT career. And at this point, I'd love to just open it up for some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much,